Elvis Presley's hands were trembling that night. In the back of a small record shop on Poplar Avenue in Memphis, among hundreds of unlabeled demo tapes, two words were written in shaky handwriting: "For Helga." When the shop owner saw Elvis's face from behind the counter, he dropped his glass. The king stood frozen, breathless, a tiny cassette between his fingers. 2 years ago, in a corner of Germany, in a hospital room nobody knew about, a promise had been made. Now that promise had returned to him inside a plastic case, and Elvis had never kept it. Not yet. To understand this, we need to go back 18 months to a freezing January night in 1959 in Bad Nauheim. Elvis was America's most famous soldier at the time, but in his garrison room, he was someone else entirely, staring at the ceiling in the dead of night, pressing his mother's photograph against his chest. 5 months had passed since Gladys Presley's death, but for Elvis, time had stopped that day. During the day, he was the perfect soldier. At night, a completely different man. Charlie Hodge would describe it years later. Some nights Elvis wouldn't speak for hours. He'd just sit there with his mother's photo and a Bible. Sometimes he'd sing to the photograph in a voice so low only he could hear, always the same lullaby, the one his mother used to sing to him when he was little. That winter, the Bad Nauheim Garrison Hospital also served German civilians. On the second floor, in the pediatric ward, in bed number 7, lay a 7-year-old girl. Her name was Helga Brandt. Diagnosis: leukemia. Her father Friedrich was a factory worker in Wiesbaden. Her mother Marta had found a job on the hospital's cleaning staff to earn money and stay close to her daughter. The poverty of post-war Germany had seeped into every corner of that family, but there was a strange light in Helga's eyes. All the nurses loved her, especially Greta Weiss, 42 years old, a woman who had lost her own child in the war, and looked after Helga with a special tenderness. Helga had one passion: music. Every evening when her mother Marta came to visit, she'd sing Brahms's lullaby. When Helga heard that lullaby, she'd close her eyes, smile, and for a few minutes stop being a sick child. How Elvis met Helga was a coincidence. Or maybe it wasn't. Nobody knows for sure. Third week of January, 1959. Elvis was at the hospital for a routine checkup. Walking down the corridor, he heard a sound from the second floor. A child was crying. A tired, exhausted, hopeless kind of crying. Elvis stopped. The soldiers beside him kept walking, but he was already climbing the stairs. Nobody could stop him. He paused at the pediatric ward door. In the bed closest to the window, a small girl sat with her knees pulled to her chest, crying silently. A bandage on her head, an IV in her arm, a teddy bear in her lap. When Elvis pushed the door open, Helga lifted her head. Before her stood a tall man in uniform, watching her carefully. Nurse Greta would recount that moment years later. When Elvis entered the room, he could have stopped the world, but he didn't. He walked slowly, crouched beside Helga's bed, and said nothing. He just looked. Helga looked back. Then, in a very faint voice, she asked, "Are you a soldier?" Elvis nodded. "I'm fighting too," said Helga, "but my enemy is inside me." Elvis left the ward 2 hours later that night, but the next night he came again. For a whole week, every night after 11, he slipped in through the hospital's back door unseen and climbed up to Helga's ward. Charlie Hodge waited at the door, not knowing what was happening inside, but what nobody knew was yet to come. At the end of the third night, Helga told Elvis about the lullaby. Her mother sang, "But my mom can't come every night anymore," she said. "My dad works the night shift." Elvis said nothing, because that sentence carried him back 10 years to Tupelo, to the edge of his mother's bed. Gladys's voice rang in his ears. The same lullaby, the same loss. On the fourth night, Elvis brought something with him. A small recording device he'd borrowed from Charlie Hodge. After Helga fell asleep, well past midnight, Elvis Presley, the most famous voice in the world, whispered Brahms's lullaby. In that small, dark hospital room. No stage, no lights, no applause, just a man and a lullaby. The song ended. Elvis forgot to turn off the microphone. At the end of the tape, there are 12 seconds of silence. Then Elvis's voice, in broken German. Schlaf gut, kleine Helga. Du bist nicht allein. Sleep well, little Helga. You are not alone. And then the sound of Elvis crying. Quiet, suppressed, his shoulders shaking silently. Charlie Hodge heard that sound from the corridor, but didn't open the door. Years later he said that not opening that door was the hardest decision of his life. Elvis put the tape in an envelope. He wrote only Helga, Krankenhaus Bad Nauheim on it, sent it through military post. But a few weeks later he was transferred, and in March 1960 he left Germany. He never saw Helga again. The tape never arrived. The hospital had been restructured, and the envelope was returned stamped recipient not found. There was no return address. Elvis hadn't written his own name. The envelope sat in a military depot for months, then was sold to a Memphis collector as part of a box of unclaimed items. When the collector closed his shop, the tapes ended up with Sam Phillips. Sam mixed them into his archive, and later dropped the surplus stock at the record shop on Poplar Avenue. The tape's journey mirrored Elvis's own. Both lost, both waiting on the wrong shelves. And now it was July 1960. Elvis, overwhelmed by the GI Blues sessions, had ducked into the shop to escape Colonel Parker's phone calls, and there, on the back shelf, he saw his own handwriting. Für Helga. The smell of the hospital, the fluorescent light in the corridor. Helga's voice. I'm fighting too, but my enemy is inside me. He pocketed the tape, walked out of the shop in silence, drove back to Graceland, locked himself in his room. Past 2 in the morning. He picked up the phone. When Red West answered, he recognized the voice as Elvis's but not the tone. Cracked, trembling. Red, do you remember Helga? Red went silent. Bad Nauheim. Hospital. Little girl. There's a tape, Elvis said. I found it. It never reached her. By the time Red hung up, it was 4 in the morning. Elvis had talked for 2 hours, but only one sentence stayed with Red. I made a promise to my mama too, Red. Told her I'd never leave her side. Then I went to the army. When she died, I wasn't there. Now this girl. What if she's still waiting for me? Next morning, Charlie Hodge caught the first flight from Nashville. 3 men met in Graceland's kitchen. Elvis placed the tape on the table. Charlie's face went pale when he saw it. I gave you that recorder, but I didn't know you sent it. Elvis hit the table, then immediately calmed down. I need to know if that girl is okay. Charlie recounted the night of the recording. When he mentioned Elvis had forgotten to turn off the microphone, Elvis froze. What do you mean I forgot? Charlie pointed at the tape. Listen, and Elvis heard his own voice. The whisper from 2 years ago, the German words, the crying. Red turned to the window. Charlie lowered his head. Nobody spoke. For minutes. Elvis broke the silence. Sam Phillips. The tapes might have come from him, and then we're going to Germany. Red thought of objecting. Parker, the press, the shooting schedule. But when he looked into Elvis's eyes, he didn't see the king. He saw the young soldier from 1959 who had heard a child crying in a hospital corridor and climbed the stairs. Sam Phillips confirmed the tapes came from the collector. Seeing Elvis's face, he asked, "What's on that tape?" Elvis didn't answer. He left. Parker was told nothing. Red activated his old military contacts in Germany. Elvis kept going to the studio as if nothing had happened. But every night at Graceland, he locked himself in his room and opened the box he'd brought from Germany. Inside his mother's photograph and the drawing Helga had given him, a singer on a stage, drawn in colored pencils. Every night he placed them side by side and asked them both the same question, "Can you forgive me?" It took Red 11 days to get word from Germany. For 11 days Elvis smiled, sang, posed for photographs. For 11 nights he sat alone in that room. On the morning of the 11th night, at 6 o'clock, the phone rang. Red's voice was different. "Elvis, I found the girl. I found her family." Silence. "Helga Brandt died on June 14, 1959, 3 months before you left Germany." A long silence on the other end. Then, very faintly, "I knew," and something broke. Red couldn't be sure, but he thought Elvis had hurled the phone at the wall. But Red hadn't told the full story yet, and what he was about to say would change everything. Red took a breath before hanging up. "Elvis, the girl is gone. But the story isn't over. I found her family, and there's a nurse, Helga's nurse. You need to hear this." Elvis didn't respond, but he didn't hang up either. When Red found the old garrison hospital in Bad Nauheim, the building had long been converted into another clinic. At the town pharmacy, the old pharmacist gave him a name: Greta Weiss, retired nurse, still living in town. When Red knocked on her door, a woman nearing 60, eyes tired but clear, answered. When she heard Elvis's name, what appeared on Greta's face wasn't surprise. It was relief. When Greta began to speak, Red West, a man who'd been in fights, taken knife wounds, shielded Elvis from crazed fans, felt his hands tremble. Helga had surprised everyone in her final months. The treatment wasn't working. Doctors had lost hope, but Helga was in a strange state of peace. She sang to the other children, the only song she knew, her mother's lullaby. When the children in the ward cried at night, Helga would get out of bed, drag her IV stand beside them, and hum Brahms's lullaby. 7 years old, leukemia patient, walking toward her own death, comforting others. Greta paused. One day I asked her, "Helga, where do you find this strength?" Helga's answer had changed Greta's life. "Because my soldier brother sang for me too. When he came, I was crying. Now I'm smiling. Maybe if I sing too, they'll smile." Helga had no idea who Elvis was. To her he was just a kind-hearted soldier, not a king, just a person who came one night and stopped her tears. But Greta's story didn't end there, and her next words sent an ice-cold shiver down Red West's spine. 3 days before Helga died, she called Greta over. From under her bed she pulled out a piece of paper, a drawing in colored pencils, a soldier singing on a stage, and beneath it in a child's handwriting, "Mein Freund Elvis." She handed the drawing to Greta. "Give this to him. He'll come back," he promised. Greta had kept that drawing for 18 months, not knowing who to give it to. Then Greta said the last thing. After Helga died, the ward went quiet. The children started crying at night again. I couldn't bear it. One night I did what Helga used to do. I went to the children and sang the lullaby. From that night on, I sang it every night. For 14 years, until I retired. After me, other nurses continued. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice held steady. Kindness is contagious. If someone sings to you, you sing to someone else. Elvis sang to Helga. Helga sang to the children. Then I sang. Who knows how many children fell asleep to that lullaby? When Red relayed all this to Elvis, he heard a strange sound on the other end. Was Elvis crying? Laughing? He couldn't tell. Then hoarse but resolute. "Red, find Friedrich Brandt. We're getting that tape to him." Red found the Brandt family in Wiesbaden. Friedrich still worked at the same factory. Marta still cleaned. They'd kept Helga's room exactly as it was. When Red knocked, Friedrich's reaction was unexpected. He didn't freeze, didn't cry. He just nodded very slowly and whispered, "Finally." On the table sat a yellowed envelope. Inside, a letter written over years. A thank you to the soldier who sang. Friedrich had never known who the soldier was, but he'd written that letter over and over, folded it, sealed it, and waited. When Red handed him the tape, Friedrich held the small plastic case in his hands for a long time. He put it in an old cassette player. When Brahms's lullaby filled the room, Every line on Friedrich's face softened, his eyes closed, his lips moved, whispering his daughter's name. The lullaby ended. 12 seconds of silence. Then Elvis's broken German. Schlaf gut, kleine Helga. Du bist nicht allein. Friedrich opened his eyes. Tears rolled down his cheeks, but he was smiling. Then the sound of crying filled the room. Friedrich stood up and leaned toward the player, as if trying to embrace the man inside the tape. Red couldn't understand the German words, but he understood the tone. Thank you. Friedrich turned to Red. Helga was smiling in her last days. The doctors said it was the medication, but a dying child doesn't smile without a reason. Now I know. Red returned to Memphis, carrying Friedrich's letter, Helga's drawing, and an unopened package. Friedrich's note, don't open it. It's for Elvis. When Elvis opened the package at Graceland, past midnight, and saw Helga's final drawing, the one she'd entrusted to Greta, his knees buckled. Mein Freund Elvis. A child's handwriting, colored pencils, a soldier singing on a stage. He already knew a copy of this drawing. Helga had given him one, but this was different. This was the last drawing Helga ever made. She had believed until her final breath that he would come back. Then he read Friedrich's letter. Years of accumulated gratitude, pain, and searching poured onto paper. One sentence in the letter destroyed Elvis completely. My daughter inspired us in her last days. She stopped crying and started singing. We never knew why. You created that reason. I want you to know, my daughter died happy. That is the greatest gift a father could ask for. Charlie Hodge was beside him. When he saw Elvis's face, he understood that the mask of the king had fallen completely. No throne, no crown, no fame, just a man who hadn't kept his promise, but had just learned that the promise had been kept after all, without him knowing. Helga had heard. Maybe not the tape, but the song, and she had carried it to others. But the final layer of the story hadn't opened yet. Elvis laid everything from the package on the table, the letter, the drawing, and one more small tape. Friedrich's note read, my wife Marta recorded this after Helga died. It's been sitting in a box for years. I didn't know what it was. I believe it's for you. Elvis's hands trembled as he put the tape in the player. 30 seconds, a woman's voice. German, but slow and clear, spoken carefully, so it could be understood. Herr Presley. Helga was always smiling in her last days. She kept saying, I'm going to listen to that song. I know now, she's listening to it. God bless you. 30 seconds. Marta's voice. A mother who, after losing her daughter, had whispered a thank you into an old recording device to a man she'd never met. Charlie Hodge described that moment years later. After listening to the tape, Elvis didn't move for a long time. Then he did something strange. He smiled. Through his tears, he smiled. And he whispered, she heard. As if nothing else in the world mattered. As if 30 seconds on a tape had lifted the weight he'd carried for years. This was not Elvis Presley's moment of collapse. It was his moment of recovery. For the first time, he understood that silent kindness never goes to waste. The tape may not have arrived, but the song did. To Helga, to Greta, to the children in the ward, spreading in waves. Elvis changed after that night. Nobody could quite put a finger on it, but Charlie Hodge saw the difference. Elvis still went to the studio, but his eyes were different. The weariness he'd shown reading Parker's film scripts had been replaced by a quiet determination. In the box at Graceland, he now kept 3 things: his mother's photograph, Helga's first drawing, and Friedrich's letter. Marta's tape he carried with him always, in his pocket, behind his wallet, in its little plastic case. He kept his word to Friedrich. He made an anonymous donation to a children's hospital in Memphis in Helga's name. The receipt bore no name, just a note. For Helga. The hospital never found the donor. In his letter to Friedrich, he wrote, your daughter taught me the true meaning of singing. It was never about the stage. It was never about the applause. One person is enough. but where Elvis kept Helga's drawing that nobody knew for a long time. 8 years passed. Elvis disappeared into Hollywood films, declared artistically dead. Summer of 1968. NBC Studios, Burbank. Rehearsals for the comeback special. For the first time in years, he was about to step onto a real stage. Everyone was on edge. Producer Steve Binder, the directors, the musicians, everyone wondering whether the king could come back. Before rehearsal, Elvis sat alone backstage. When Charlie Hodge walked in, he saw a small folded piece of paper in Elvis's hand, a drawing in colored pencils. The edges worn, the fold lines deep, but the image still clear, a soldier singing on a stage. Charlie recognized it. 8 years, Elvis had been carrying that drawing for 8 years. Elvis looked up. There was a strange light in his eyes. Not fear, not sadness, but resolve. He turned to Charlie and said very quietly, "We're going to sing a little differently today, Charlie. For a girl." The stage lights came on. That night, Elvis delivered one of the most unforgettable performances in television history. Nobody knew why he sang with such depth. Nobody knew what he carried in his pocket, but Charlie Hodge knew. How long did the tradition that Nurse Greta started continue at that hospital? Nobody knows for certain. When Red West visited Bad Nauheim again years later, he heard a nurse on the night shift singing a lullaby in the children's ward. Nobody remembered the name of the tradition, but the lullaby was the same. In an interview, Charlie Hodge said only this: "Elvis always had something in his pocket. I never asked what. But some nights, before going on stage, he'd look at it, and on those nights, he'd sing differently, deeper." Elvis Presley sang to millions. He filled stadiums, broke records, shook thrones. But the moment that changed his life happened in a hospital room no spotlight ever reached, a lullaby whispered to a single child. The tape never arrived, but the song did, from Helga to Greta. From Greta to the children in the ward, from there to a tradition that stretched across years. One lullaby, one night, one promise. Everyone knew the king. But that night, there was only Elvis. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it, because kindness, just like Helga's lullaby, only travels when you pass it on. Drop a comment and tell us what's the smallest act of kindness someone once did for you that you never forgot. And don't forget to follow for more untold stories that history tried to bury. Sometimes the most powerful song is the one that's never heard, and the most precious crown is the one that shines where no one is watching.